Carl Dean Wilson was born the youngest of the three Wilson boys in Hawthorne, California, the youngest son of Audrey Neva and Murray Gage Wilson. From his pre-teens, he practiced harmony vocals under the guidance of his brother Brian, who often sang in the family room with his mother and brothers. Inspired by country star Spade Cooley at the age of 12, Carl asked his parents to buy him a guitar, for which he took some lessons. While Brian perfected the band's vocal style and keyboard bass, Carl's Chuck Berry-esque guitar became an early Beach Boys trademark. While in high school, Carl also studied saxophone. Turning 15 as the group's first hit Surfing broke locally in Los Angeles, Carl's father and manager Murray, who had sold his business to support his son's band, bought him a Fender Jaguar guitar. Carl developed as a musician and singer through the band's early recordings in the early Surf Lick sound shown Fun Fun Fun, recorded in 1964 when Carl was 17. Also in 1964, Carl contributed his first co-writing credit on a Beach Boys single with the guitar riff and solo in Dance Dance Dance, co-written with Mike Love and Brian Wilson. By the end of 1964, he was diversifying, favoring the 12-string Rickenbacker that was also nobly used by Roger McGuinn in establishing the sound of the Byrds and by George Harrison of the Beatles during this era. Dave Marsh in the Rolling Stone Illustrated History of Rock and Roll from 1976 say that Pete Townshend of The Who expanded on both R&B and rock that was influenced heavily by Beach Boy Carl Wilson. Carl's lead vocals in the band's first 3 years were infrequent. Although all members of the band played on their early recordings, Brian began to employ experienced session musicians to play on the group's instrumental tracks by 1965 to assist with the complex material, but the band weren't entirely eliminated from recording the instrumental tracks and still continued to play on certain songs on each album. Unlike the other members of the band, Carl often played alongside session musicians and also recorded his individual guitar leads during the Beach Boys' vocal sessions, with his guitar plugged directly into the soundboard. His playing can be heard on the introduction to California Girls, 1966, That's Not Me, and throughout 1965's The Beach Boys Today. After Brian's retirement from touring in 1965, Carl became the musical director of the band on stage. Contracts at the time stipulate that promoters hire Carl Wilson plus 4 other musicians. Following his lead vocal performance on God Only Knows in 1966, Carl was increasingly lead vocalist for the band, a role previously dominated by Mike Love and Brian. He sang leads on the singles Good Vibrations, Darling, and Wild Honey. Starting with the album Wild Honey, Brian requested that Carl become more involved in the Beach Boys records. In 1969, the Beach Boys' rendition of I Can Hear Music was the first track produced solely by Carl Wilson. By then, he had effectively become the band's in-studio leader, producing the bulk of the albums during the early 1970s. Though Carl had written surf instrumentals for the band in the early days, he did not get into his stride as a songwriter until the 1971 album Surf's Up, for which he composed Long Promised Road and Fuel Flows, with lyrics by the band's then-manager Jack Riley. Carl considered Long Promised Road his first real song. After producing the majority of Carl and the Passion So Tough from 1972 and Holland from 1973, Carl's leadership role diminished somewhat due to Brian's brief public re-emergence and because of Carl's own substance abuse problems. For LA Light album from 1979, Carl contributed 4 songs, among them Good Timing, co-written with Brian 5 years earlier, which became a top 40 American hit. Carl's main writing partner in the late 1970s was Jeffrey Cushing Murray, but for Keeping Summer Alive, he wrote with Randy Bachman of the band Bachman Turner Overdrive. Carl told Michael Feeney Callan, writer-director of the 1993 documentary The Beach Boys Today, that Bachman was his favorite writing partner. As a producer and vocalist, Carl's work was not confined to the Beach Boys. During the 1970s, he also produced records for other artists such as Richie Martin, son of Dean Martin, and South African group The Flames, 2 members of which later temporarily joined the Beach Boys lineup. He lent backing vocals to many works including Chicago's hits Baby What a Big Surprise and Wishing You Were Here, which Al Jardine and Dennis Wilson also did backing vocals on there as well from the Beach Boys. Elton John's Don't Let the Sun Go Down Me with fellow Beach Boy Bruce Johnston. David Lee Roth's hit cover of California Girls. Warren Zevon's Desperados Under the Eaves, and the Carney Wendy Wilson holiday track Hey Santa. Carl also recorded a duet with Olivia Newton-John titled You Were Great, How Was I for his studio album Soul Kiss 1985. It was not released as a single. Carl befriended and gave guitar lessons to Alex Chilton when the Box Tops toured with the Beach Boys. By the early 1980s, the Beach Boys were in disarray. The band had split into camps. Frustrated with the band's sluggishness to record new material and reluctance to rehearse, Wilson took a leave of absence in 1981. He quickly recorded and released a solo album named Carl Wilson, composed largely of rock and roll songs co-written with Myrna Smith Schilling, a former backing vocalist for Elvis Presley and Aretha Franklin, and wife of Wilson's then-manager, Jerry Schilling. The album briefly charted, and its single Heaven reached the top 20 on Billboard's Adult Contemporary chart. Wilson also undertook a solo tour to promote the album, becoming the first member of the Beach Boys to break ranks. Initially, Wilson and his band played clubs like the Bottom Line in New York City and the Roxy in Los Angeles. Thereafter, he joined the Doobie Brothers as opening acts for their 1981 summer tour. Wilson recorded another solo album titled Youngblood in a similar vein, but by the time of its release in 1983, he had rejoined the Beach Boys. Although Youngblood did not chart, a single, the John Hall penned What You Do to Me, peaked at number 72, making Wilson the second Beach Boy to land a solo single on the Billboard Hot 100, beaten by Brian in 1966. Additionally, the song cracked the top 20 on Billboard's Adult Contemporary chart. Wilson frequently performed that song in Rocking All Over the World from the same album, as well as Heaven from the 1981 album at Beach Boys concerts in the 1980s. Heaven was also announced as a tribute to Brother Dennis, who drowned in December of 1983. The Beach Boys' eponymous album prominently featured Wilson's lead vocals and songwriting, highlighted by his It's Getting Late, another top 20 adult contemporary hit, and the Heaven Like Where I Belong. In 1988, the Beach Boys scored their biggest chart success in more than 20 years with the U.S. #1 song Kokomo, co-written by Mike Love, John Phillips, Scott McKenzie, and Terry Melcher, on which Carl sang lead in the chorus. After this, Love increasingly dominated the band's recorded output and became the driving force behind the album Summer in Paradise from 1992, the first and only Beach Boys album with no input from Brian in any form. In 1992, Carl told Michael Feeney Callan his hope was to record new material by Brian. Carl continued recording through the 1990s and participated in the Don Was lead recordings of Brian's Soul Searching and You're Still a Mystery, songs conceived as the basis of a canceled Brian Wilson Beach Boys album. He also recorded the album Like a Brother with Robert Lamb and Jerry Beckley, while continuing to tour with the Beach Boys until the last months of his life. In 1997, Wilson became ill at his vacation home in Hawaii. He was diagnosed with lung cancer and was started on chemotherapy. He had been smoking cigarettes since his early teens. Despite his illness and treatments, he continued to play and sing with the Beach Boys throughout their entire summer tour till its completion in the fall of 1997. Unfortunately, Wilson died of lung cancer in Los Angeles, surrounded by his family, on February 6, 1998. His death occurred just 2 months after the death of his mother, Audrey Wilson. He was interred at Westwood Village Memorial Park Cemetery in Los Angeles. And I just want to say thank you guys for watching, and if you haven't already, like and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed this video, and let me know in the comments what other artists do you want me to tell you about what happened to them. I can do anyone from the late 50s to even the early 90s or late 80s. It's really up to you guys. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.